Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Satlin. How's it going, man?
Feels like it's going to be a productive Sunday. I don't usually get those because I'm just always writing, but not only did we get two articles out today, not only am I going to do a podcast with you, not only am I going to edit another little thing that we have coming, if not tonight, then tomorrow. I'm just going to be able to clean my house today. Like I did some errands. I'm productive. I'm really good at this whole life thing. I don't want to brag, but I'm pretty good. Now, granted,
I'm
I,
glad
I
that
don't have
you.
a child. I don't have a child and a wife like you, so there's the difference there. But
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm glad you feel good because I feel like every other hour, I feel like life is falling apart, and I am having to rush and clean something or fix something or think about these big picture things that I don't want to think about. But yeah, I enjoy those spaces of time where you feel good
well,
about
I
life.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I'm not looking forward to the day where I have to have more responsibility. But by then we'll be a well-oiled machine more than we already are now. What's not a well-oiled machine is the number of reviews that we're getting on Apple and Spotify. It's not as quick as efficient as I'd like that to be. Got one on Spotify. I don't think anything else anywhere else. Apologies on the video thing from last time. Didn't get any video of our episode out on YouTube. Last week there were some technical issues, but otherwise, ratings and reviews, Apple, Spotify, go check them out. Ben, um, where are we starting today?
Yes, let's go ahead and talk about our team rankings. We have gone through another set of teams this past week that we have released to the site. I think we went through, what was it, 19 through 14 maybe last week. We are going to go through teams 13 through 7 this week. And that leads us to, and we'll start on the women's side this week, that leads us to the Michigan State Spartans, who come in at number 13. Now, this is a team that we had some good conversations with about whether or not they should be ranked ahead of Ohio State, who was our number 14 team. What ultimately pushed them over the edge in your mind for this ranking?
For me, it's just the fact that they return everyone. They're super deep. They're much more experienced now. I think we saw a lot of progress from this team. Especially you add in the improvements of Stuart Barnett and Caitlin Hines and McKenna Veen, and on top of already having Katie Osika, I thought Lauren Freeland was really solid. The Ewer addition via transfer is nice,
Mm-hmm.
but I
It's a
for
wild
me it's
card.
like if yeah, exactly. A wild card. I don't think she brings you any downside, which is great. Like you're not going to be heavily relying on her, so she's only going to bring upside. But I also am not going to bank anything on that actually happening, just because we haven't really seen it happen, at least not recently. So for me, I saw no
Mm-hmm.
downside. I didn't see a ton of lineup flaws. They were the Big Ten champions last year, and I thought, well, how could they not be better? And so for me, that's why I was on the side of I think 13 is a fair spot for them.
Yeah, I think it's a fair argument. I think Ohio State's top trio is what their advantage is, but I think the advantages that you just outlined for Michigan State is that they have a lot of depth. They're bringing back a lot of their women, and they do have one true low stick. It's not like they're devoid of firepower up front. And they have someone in Ewert that could turn into something. And like you said, we're not really banking on that, but they at least have that potential in there. And then they also have women like you mentioned, McKenna Bean and Caitlin Hines, who have maybe the potential to step up and bring a little bit more firepower to that front of the lineup. And I think if they can do that, then this is a team that we're not only looking at that is better than Ohio State. I think this is a team that we could be looking at inside the top 10, because I think that's really what's holding them back is they just don't have that two or three score, number two and number three scores that you feel really good about being in like the top 60 to 80 range. And if they can kind of get in there and they have plenty of depth where I'm not worried about their 4 or 5 scores, they'll figure that out. If they can really improve those 2, 3 slots, I think they're going to be a really dangerous team. It's just whether I think how you feel about this team is how confident you feel that happening this year.
And I think that's fair. I think it's a fair assessment. Let me ask you this. Well, first off, who was the team that you were banking for? Were you banking for
I
Ohio
was
State? I
Ohio
think
State,
you were.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I like their front trio. I think they have a lot less margin for risk than this Michigan State team. I think they could be a very all over the place team this year, like they kind of were last year. So there's a lot more risk baked in, but I think they have a higher end if because they just need to improve those 4-5 scores. Where I think Michigan State's looking at a situation where they're trying to improve those 2-3 scores, which depending on who you are, and for me, I think that's a little bit of a harder thing to do than find a good 4-5 or a decent 4-5.
Do the Michigan State women, are they better on are they the top Big Ten team at their conference meet and the national meet this year?
I feel really good about them being the best team at the Big Ten. I think where the advantages of depth are more where like a low stick isn't giving you as much bang for your buck at a conference meet that's a little smaller than they are at a national meet. I'm on the fence. I think I would still go Ohio State at the national meet just because I think having those three women up front are going to separate themselves a little bit more and give Ohio State more of a cushion. But I would go Michigan State at the conference meet.
Okay, that's interesting. I like that. Okay.
What do you? I mean, does that logic make sense to
It
you, or
does.
what
It
do you
does
think?
make sense because, but then I can also counter you and say, well, I'd like Michigan State's depth more because then I know that I feel like I've more safe, like
Oh,
I have more
absolutely.
safety, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like which one of these teams are going to nail like their ranking at nationals, I would pick Michigan State
Right.
being like you're like they're going to land in this 12 to 14 range almost like I feel very confident. Whereas Ohio State, I could be like, yeah, maybe you finish 19th, maybe you finish 11th. Like I think they have just a much more wider range of outcomes.
Let's transition to the Texas Men. This is a really fun team, really cool team. They bring back a good number of guys, but they also added in Devin Hart, the Stanford fringe low stick, I guess you could say at times. I guess you could say it was a low stick.
Potential,
Yeah,
yeah.
potential. I mean, you pair him with Isaac Alonso. You pair him with who was the other name?
Have to night.
Thank you. I'm completely blanking on that one. Have tonight. You get a loaded top three. I mean, that's a star-studded top
Yeah.
three. The rest of the lineups where things get a little tricky, but I personally am a big fan of Roger Rivera. I think he's great. Abraham Avila Martinez. Yeah, I think I got that right. I think he's a solid name. They've got some nice youngsters in the works. I like a lot of the guys on this team, and I feel pretty good about where we rank them.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting contrast to what we were just talking about, and I feel like they're fairly similar to Ohio State in a lot of ways where you feel good, but they have a better. Their top three have a much higher even higher potential, but they also have a lot more risk baked into them. Like I mean, Devin Hart, great runner, showed amazing flashes last year, and wasn't bad necessarily at the national meet, but just wasn't quite as good as maybe he had shown throughout the year. And so if he's at the top of his game, I think he is a bona fide low stick. I think you can say the same thing about Have to Night. For Alonso, I think he needs to continue to improve and show his reliability a little bit more as well. So you look at that top three, and it's just like if they all put it together on the same day, we're talking about a team that maybe not quite as high of a potential as maybe those Alabama teams of old. They have that same kind of structure, and they have guys in those 4 or 5 or the depth to fill in those 4 or 5 slots a little bit better. So that the top end potential huge. If I was a betting man, I don't know how comfortable I would
Agreed.
be betting the futures on this
Agreed.
team.
Agreed.
They make me super nervous, and I think 13 is the perfect spot for them because it acknowledges, hey, this could be a top 10 team, but at the same time, we're like, this could also be a 18th place team if things don't go well. So I think this is right in the range, but they are going to be a hugely fascinating team to watch over the next year.
I agree. The volatility with a lot of these guys is a little scary. Like Alonso was great, but he had some races that were better than others.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't always like right there. You weren't like definitively like, oh, he's 100% a top 50 runner. Now, granted, we put him in there for one update, but he wasn't never fully there. Um, then you have, Haftu Knight, where the national meet was by far the best race of his career.
Yeah.
Devin Hart, we saw last year, amazing at his best, but inconsistent in terms of relative to expectations. Were any of these guys like truly awful? No, they weren't. But then you look at the back end as well. You go, okay, well, Gomez is gone, and how good is Avia Martinez and Nathaniel Berhane? I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. They got some young guys who are still kind of developing. Roger Rivera, again, I don't know how consistent he's been compared to some of his performances in the past. It's a very it's a team that's really much in a state of flux in terms of I don't always feel super confident about what we're going to get, but if this team's firing on all cylinders, I would not be happy like trying to have to defeat this team.
Yeah, I mean, they have the potential of three All Americans in Rivera, who's finished 83rd at nationals before. If he comes in and is a top like 75 guy, suddenly like it really doesn't matter that much who that fifth guy is. They're going to be a top 10 team.
Yep.
Easily. And so like that's why we had such a hard time with this team, is because they do have that potential. They have guys that have had performances that make you think that they could put together at three All-Americans and a very good fourth. And at the same time, they just haven't, none of them have been particularly consistent. And I think that's a theme that we're going to be seeing for a lot of these teams, probably outside our top five.
Yeah, I would agree. So I like this team. I think we got the point across though. So we can now move on to 12. Let's go there. And our 12 team on the women's side is Providence. And I feel like they're just a souped up version of Michigan State. Is that fair?
I think so. You have a little bit more oomph up front, and you have good depth as well.
So like for me, like the way I look at it is this, right? So the low stick Jane Buckley is actually pretty
Yeah.
similar to Katie Osika, right? Where Laura Mooney is, we clearly know that she can be better. She was pretty quiet last year, even though we viewed her going to last fall as a top 50 name. If she clicks on all cylinders, then she's a lot better than I think some people will realize. You
Yep.
have other women like Lily Tuck and Shannon Flockhart, who are probably just slightly better versions of what McKenna Veen and Caitlin Hines are going to be for Michigan State. But then you also have some nice back end pieces, Nima Mahoney, Kimberly May, who was great on the track. And the difference, however, with this team is Annabelle Eastman, who we've
Yep.
had spoken before in past podcasts. True veteran, very consistent, a top 100 finisher two times on the national stage. She's the one who really makes me excited about this team. And I think you could even argue that Providence is as good as 11th or 10th, depending on how much you like her and maybe how much better some of these other women are going to be.
She just gives them a high floor.
Yeah.
When you can just throw in someone that you feel like is almost a lock to be a top 100 name, and you're not banking on that person to be a top two scorer, like it just gives you such a nice floor. And she could be their fourth scorer like this year too. And that's what makes us excited about this team, is that she could potentially be number four and still be in that 80 range, 80, 90 range, which would just be huge for this team. And like I was saying earlier, it's really hard to go wrong with having like one or two All Americans and then a few runners in that top 100. You're gonna finish around the top 10, if not in the inside the top 10. And I think that's the structure that Providence has. Well, probably not as explosive as the Texas team we just talked about. You got to feel better about their depth and about just the reliability they have going into this year.
Yeah, like I see it's kind of like Michigan State. I don't see any downside. I just
Yeah.
don't. I don't see how this team has a poor race. I mean, one, maybe two women can have an off day and they're still going to probably be, producing one of their better performances from last year. So I just look at this team. I'm like, I see only upside. I don't think their ceiling's like dramatically that much higher, but I think their floor is like 14, 15. Like they're
Oh
12
yeah.
right now. I just don't see how they have a poor race. Reese Fays or Fahey's, I don't even know if I'm even saying that right. She's a nice recruit to have. I think Higgins is another recruit who I'm just thinking of right now. But yeah, like the depth is there. And for me, like I'm a big Kimberly May fan. I love what she did. I question if the middle distance stuff is going to translate. I really hope it does. But I think Lily Tuck is really good. Like I just like all these women. Like I just think they all bring legitimate value, and I think almost all of them can be better.
Yeah, I was going to mention Lily Tuck real quick. I mean, sixth at Big East, 9-11 in the 3K, 15-56 in the 5K. Like that, she should be a middle of the, like, based off of that, would look like to be a middle lineup score, and she might be their sixth or seventh woman. Like, and that's I think why we feel so good about this team. Just at least, at the very least, being a top 15 team, and at their very best, top 10.
I agree. I very much agree. Okay, let's move on to the Villanova Men, another Big East team here, where I think we surprised ourselves by where we placed them. Now, initially, we placed them, I think, a little too high, and then we all got together. We were like, that's maybe too high. And then we brought them back. But I still think 12 is a very nice ranking for them. I think they should be really happy about that, despite losing Charlie O'Donovan, Jack Jennings, Josh Phillips, Jack Friedian. If any other team had lost those guys, we'd be like, you're tumbling down from where you finished, last year in our rankings. And Villanova finished what, 19th at the national meet, like 20th. I mean, it wasn't pretty. So the nice thing though with this team is that they have Liam Murphy, they have Haftu Strinsos, who we believe should probably be at a better version of himself this fall. We're big fans of Marco Langone, or at least I'm a big fan of Marco Langone. Like I think they have a solid three, and they also bring in uh, Zion Shively, right? They bring in Ryan Credell. Nice transfers, really great recruiting class. Devin Comer could be better. I see a lot of avenues where this team can improve. And if Marcus O'Sullivan wasn't as good with developing his youngsters as he's proven to be, I wouldn't be that confident about this ranking. But I actually do think this is a nice spot for them.
Yeah, the Jack Jennings loss was really tough
That was
because
tough.
he
That's tough.
he gave them like three that you felt like you could build a team around, and then you had question marks maybe at the 4 or 5 spot, but there were only two question marks. Now you have Liam Murphy, who we feel great about, and I think Hastu Strinsos is obviously going to be kind of the big X factor for this team. If he's at the top of his game, they have two good low sticks. Takes a lot of pressure off the back end of that lineup. But if he's not as good as he was 2 years ago, or not close to that, this is going to be a team that's going to struggle, I think, to be near the top 10 and like justify this 12 ranking. I think we believe in him, which is why we have them at 12. But I think in a lot of ways, the season will come down to him. Besides him, though, you like the pieces that they have to fill that 3, 4, 5 spot. It's just going to require a lot of the pieces to hit in a big way. Like I like Zion Shively. I think he's going to be good, but they kind of need him to be good, and that's
Yeah,
not a
they
great
do.
situation to be in, where you're relying on a transfer who was good at Cal Poly for the like last year, but wasn't fantastic. And it's you can say the same thing about a lot of these other men, especially the younger guys, where it's like they kind of need at least one person to really step up to justify this, and we think they will, just because they have the numbers and they have the track record of developing guys. It's just they don't have that margin for error that we thought they would, despite having two potentially very, very strong low sticks.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, do they scare me? Yeah. Yeah, they definitely scare me. But I mean, after what we saw last year, and I'm like, okay, I can start arguing that like Murphy and Strinsos are going to be much better on the national stage, like much better on the national stage this year than compared to last year. And if that's the case, then you're dropping a ton of points just in them alone.
Yeah.
Now, granted, the bar was low last year at the national meet. Like that's not
Yeah.
how well they ran. But I like Langone, and I struggle to believe that there's not going to be a fourth guy out there who's not like I like Devin Comer. Maybe it's just because I have the Comer
Yeah.
bias of racing against his brother. Um, but it's just one of those things where I'm looking at this team and I go, well, no, surely someone has to break out. Like, surely
Yeah.
someone. And you bring in the transfers. Like, Credell, I think we're underrating a little bit. I think he was really solid at the D3 level, D3 All American on the grass. Great 5K, 10K runner. He was only getting better over this past year. Shively, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. 25th at Joe Piani, I think he was. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a nice result. Like, that's a good result. If he's going to be that fourth runner at 25th at Joe Piani, that's a good result. Like, that would have made him one of Michigan's top guys at that meet. So,
Villanova's one of
um,
Villanova's top guys.
no, I mean,
Oh.
like, the Michigan men would
Oh.
have
Okay.
had
Right.
Yeah, like if he was on that team, he would have been one of Michigan's top guys.
Okay.
So that's why I like can somewhat justify this ranking. Is it a little scarier than maybe the Michigan State women or Providence women? Yeah, a little bit, but not as scary, I don't think.
Yeah, you can sense a theme about how we feel about the women's side of the rankings versus the men, where it's like
Yep.
this range for the men is a little kind of grit your teeth and yep, I think this will work for a good ranking because truthfully, it's just very hard. A lot of these teams lost a lot of guys, and you're kind of having to forecast a lot more than we have for a lot of these other previous rankings.
It's like I said before, hardest year by far to rank the men's teams. Okay, 11, Virginia. Thoughts when we were like, hey, we're going to rank Virginia 11?
Yeah, it's tough when you lose someone like Mia Barnett and other losses. It's hard to be like, all right, this team, after a shockingly good national performance, should be ranked this high. Um, but you look at the improvements that this team has made over the course of the year. Huge Margot Appleton fan, and it makes sense. And I think there's an argument for them with inside the top 10. I think you look at just the way that they improved throughout the year last year, the way that they improved throughout the indoor and outdoor season. I I think it's a pretty perfect spot. And I love Tatum David. I think she's going to be a really good fit for this
Mm-hmm.
team. They've shown that they can slot these really young talents in and kind of work them in slowly into the lineup. I mean, being eighth at NXN, she was 10th or eighth and 10th at nationals for Garmin and Foot Locker. Like she has great potential on the grass, and I think for a Virginia team that can kind of look at her as a lottery ticket in a lot of ways of being like, hey, we got enough people that can kind of fill in the gaps. If you're great, that's awesome, but we don't necessarily need you to be great. And I think that's what's really exciting about this Cavalier team.
Yeah, yeah, and plus, like they bring in a few like great graduate transfers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I mean, by great, I mean they can at least add depth. You
Yeah.
know, Margaret Hawk from Princeton, Lizzie Bader from Penn, Caroline Tim from Kennesaw State, who's now on her third team, which I thought was interesting. And like Tim ran 4:36 in the mile, like she could be pretty good. And they bring in Jillian Boucher and Kate DeSousa, who were strong high school recruits as well. Like if you really do the math, the Mia Barnett loss is hard. It's tough. It's not fun, but it's not totally devastating. Like the way this team is structured, most teams would not be able to lose a runner like Barnett and then be like, well, they'll be largely just as good as last year.
Yeah.
And that's the difference with this team. Now, granted, some of these women need to be a little bit more consistent. You look at like different points of where they were during the postseason. They were a little up and down, but you look at the best performances of Appleton, Atkinson, Menninger, and Workman, you
Mm-hmm.
put them all together and you go, well, if Sealand's just doing what she did last year,
Yeah.
this team is probably no different. They really aren't.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the exciting part about having these graduate transfers and freshmen come in is like you have an existing lineup that you feel pretty good about, and anything that you can get from these other women is kind of gravy. And like they provide such a good baseline where if just one or two of these women pop, and obviously we've talked about that in a lot of for a lot of these teams where it's like, hey, if they have all these runners who have shown potential, but they just need to if they pop, that'll push them up the ranking. For this team, their floor doesn't rely on any of these women popping. It's just their ceiling. So like it's hard for us to say that they're going to be any worse than like 12th, I think this year, or like 13th maybe, because they just have such a good or such a good floor, and they could be I think they could be almost a podium threat if one or two things
Mm-hmm.
bounce their way, which is pretty amazing for a team at 11.
Appleton's probably going to be an All American, but
Oh
before we
yeah.
move on, who would be your best bet to
Ooh.
be that second potential All American?
Hmm. Um. I think I'll go with Manager just because
Mm,
she had two good performances. A little bit more didn't necessarily have the national performance out of some of these women, but fifth at Panoramas, 12th at ACCs. I think I'll go her.
I think that's fair. I would have taken Atkinson,
Yeah.
given how well she's run in the postseason, just not this past fall, but last spring. So I like her quite a bit, but I don't think that's a wrong answer. So,
Yep.
all right, let's move on. Let's go to the Tennessee men. And the story with the Tennessee men is Yassin Abdallah and everyone else. Here's what we said in the article. So Yassin Abdallah, their true low stick, right?
Yep.
Here's the rest of this lineup that could be in any way, shape, or form a top seven. Uh, Gabriel Sanchez, transfer from Indiana. Brandon Olding, grad transfer from Siena. Absafeta, grad transfer from Miami, Ohio. Nate Kowalik, a returner who is also a grad transfer from NC State. Eli Nahom, he's a returner. Jacob Lewis, he was a returner and grad transfer from Grand Canyon. Kenan Anderson is a returner. Christopher Cherry is a transfer from Illinois Springfield. Brett Brady is a transfer from Navy. Will Cahill is a transfer from UT Martin. Dean Casey is an international recruit, a very good one, may I add. Jacob Nenau is a domestic recruit, a very good one, I may add. Pavel Vanduska, I haven't had to say that yet, is an international recruit, more of a 1500 meter runner. And Nathan Nachu is more of a domestic recruit, but a very good one. So, Ben, I'm going to try to do an exercise here. Try to give me your top five and what their top five is going to be in what order.
All right. I think you got it. So I'm just gonna spitball here for who the top five
Sure.
will, and then
Okay.
I will try to put them in order. I think Dean
Okay.
Casey's in there. I
Yep.
think Nate Kowalik is in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Gabriel Sanchez.
Mm-hmm.
So that's we're up to four if we're including
For
Abdallah.
Abdallah.
Oh, this is tough. I think Eli Nahom.
We have the same top five. Let's
Oh,
go.
that's amazing. And you just have so many guys like I mean I that could potentially be in there, which is I think what's exciting. I think Jacob Nenau is probably the other one that I was looking at pretty hard. But I think Nahom showed with the 19th place at Joe Piani he that he can race at a high level. Kowalik I think is a little bit more I'm not going to say consistent, but more proven, just being a veteran. And then Sanchez, you look at his resume from last year, and it was just very solid. And then who was my other name that I had? Oh, Dean Casey. I mean, sub 29, sub 14 as a 20-year-old, like third at U20 in European cross.
He ran some of those as like when he was like below
Yeah,
20,
I
like 18,
mean,
19 years old.
that's why it's going to be a hard adjustment, I think, for him early in the year with the heat coming from Ireland and running in the Knoxville humidity. But I think by the time you get to the end of the year and you're in October and November, I think his experience and what he's done at the European level on the grass leads me, and those track times, I think he's going to be a big part of this team.
The other one I would have said is Absafeta, and I might even still consider him for that top five group. I mean, he was eighth at Louisville Classic, sixth at Bradley Pink Classic, and he won the MAC XC championships. To me,
Mm-hmm.
I look at that and go, oh, he was also 21st at Great Lakes, and I go, I don't know how many guys on this team are doing better than
Yeah,
that. You know, I just don't.
that's
Like,
fair.
I mean, I can like Nahom all I want, but if I just don't know. But now if we're debating whether someone like that is even in your top five, you can now begin to see why we justified Tennessee at 11 because they were probably 14, 15, maybe 13 ranked around there going into last year's national meet. Struggled at last year's national meet, and now somehow they lose Dylan Jacobs and Carl Thiessen, but they're ranked 11th. Like, I can understand why people could be confused there. But now we just did an exercise where we had to pick from like 15 names as to what their lineup's going to look like. We will probably be wrong, and yet they could still be 11. So the floor for this team is like 23. The ceiling for this team is like 6 or 7.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that they have completely flipped their strengths and weaknesses from last year.
Yeah,
Like their
yeah.
strengths was there. They had three guys that we thought were going to be, or two in particular that we felt like were going to be surely All American, true low stick. Someone in Carl Thiessen who could kind of bridge the gap between those top two and their back their fourth and fifth scores. And now it's just kind of like you got one low stick and you got a lot of depth, and you just got to hope that that depth translates translates quickly, because they are going to need a lot of guys who were not in the lineup last year or were not in Knoxville to step up in a big way this year.
I would agree. I would agree. Okay, let's move on to our number 10 team here, which is the BYU Women. And you want to talk about a heartbreaker?
Yeah,
Like, this team and our next men's team. I hated ranking. I mean, the 8, 9, 10, 11 spots for the women and for the men
brutal
were miserable. Miserable. More the 8, 9, 10 for the men were more miserable. Were
for different reasons, I
it
feel
was
like.
yeah, but it was the challenges that we had for the rankings were more difficult on the 8, 9, 10 spots for the men, whereas the women it was 8, 9, 10, 11. When I say like it kept me up at night, I'm not kidding. I'm staring at the wall like the night before, like I'm just laying there like, well, I think I can make arguments for all of these teams
Yeah,
at this spot. Like, and that's the problem. The story of this team is Halliday Lowry is back, and so is Aubrey
yep,
Frentway, but they lose McKenna Lee, who is much better than people like will
absolutely.
realize, even though she wasn't an All American at the national meet. They also lose Sadie Sargent. They bring back a few others. I want to say Davis, Anastasia Davis. They also bring back Jenna Hutchins, who's basically the massive X factor
Yeah,
in all of this. That and also depends on how good do you think Riley Chamberlain's going to be? How good do you think Taylor Rotahinsky? How good do you think Carmen
older.
Alder's going to
Yeah,
be? Yeah. So that's the thing here. For us, for at least for me, I haven't seen Hutchins put together more than
two races in
two
a row.
two good
Yeah,
races, like two good races, I should say. And last fall wasn't a great end. It was not a great end to her spring. She's had one awesome race to show, like, hey, she's still there, but I need to see something more before I have a little more confidence. And if she's there, then yeah, BYU's ranked way higher than 10. But I don't know that for sure. Like for perspective, let me give you a fun little stat
yep.
here. At Nuttycombe, if you take out McKenna Lee from the results, she was oh gosh, where was it? I just had this. But I think they go from fourth place to
Yeah,
11th place at Nuttycombe. So that's my crazy stat.
yeah, and that's pretty wild. That one runner who isn't like you said, wasn't an All American last year, can have such a big impact on a team. I think when you look at this BYU team, it's similar to the Tennessee team we talked about, where you have, um, except for they maybe have two potential low sticks. I think Holiday Lowry is someone that I'm bullish on, being a lot closer to Aubrey Frentaway this year. But the difference with this BYU team versus Tennessee is we've seen this coaching staff develop runners, and more importantly, the biggest difference is they've had these runners in their system for years, and a lot of them this isn't like a bunch of transfers coming in. This isn't a bunch of first years coming in. They've been able to develop these women to be ready to step in and fill these roles, and they've proven that done that year over year over year. And so I think it's hard for us to rank them higher than 10, because we don't really know who those names are going to be necessarily, but I think we have confidence that they should be a top 10 team, because someone's going to step up, and they've shown too much potential throughout the years for them not to be at least in the top 10.
And that's what scares me. I think the stat that Mara opens up with is for the last 7 cross country seasons, the Cougars have finished among the top 10 at the national meet, and they've been on the podium 3 times. I remember when we ranked BYU like 10 or 11, and it was going into the pandemic altered cross country season. It was the what if everything was normal rankings. And they were then won the national title. So, like, granted, I think there's more arguments here now than there were back then, but that's what scares me. And I don't like that we rank them here. I know, like, they're going to be better. They'll be better. I just don't know how much better. But the problem is that I just don't know how, and I can't justify it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, we can only rank based off of what we know. And it's hard to put a uh, objective value to they've been good before they have a good coaching staff. Like, how do you factor that into our formula of ranking? It's impossible to do.
Well, guess what? We also did it on the men's side. Okay, so it was largely no different with the Colorado men. They bring back their top low stick in Austin Vansel. They lose
Everyone
their
else.
next four scorers. They lose their next four scorers. They lose Seth Hirsch. They lose Andrew Kent. They lose Charlie Sweeney, and they lose Brendan Fraser. Oh my gosh, that team wouldn't even be top 20. Like, I mean, those are losses that where you go, oh, well, no, they're not going to be. But then you like dissect this roster, you're going, oh, they're pretty good. they got some dudes. Cole Matheson is a lot better in high school than I thought he would be. Like, was like, don't get me wrong, everyone knew he was like elite of the
Mm-hmm.
elite. I didn't realize how close he was to like the top tier. I knew he won, the NXN title, or not the Champ Sports title, excuse me. But then you really look at his resume, you're like, this guy screams Colorado.
Yep.
He is like the epitome of long distance aerobic talent at Colorado. And then you go down the list, and it is unbelievable. They got Noah Hibbert, who was 13th at Pac-12s.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter Appleton, who's run 13:52, and he was 18th at Pac-12s. Lucas Hogg, who was 57th at Cowboy Jamboree. Jace Ashburner, who's run 28:45. You got James Overberg, who was 40th at Cowboy Jamboree, unattached, by the way, or regularly attached. Excuse me. Givens was 47th at Cowboy Jamboree, unattached. They add in Paul Stafford. They bring in a bunch of young guys. This is a good team, like a really good team. Someone's gonna pop. I don't know who it is, and that's why I don't like this ranking for Colorado at all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could go on and on about a couple of these names. Paul Stafford showed a lot of flashes at Florida State. I think this is a perfect program for him to land to. I think he could have like an Andrew Kent, maybe not that kind of top end, but that kind of improvement.
Okay,
Where
I was gonna say that's a bold
no,
statement.
yeah, I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Andrew Kent, but I could see him having a lot of that same kind of improvement. I think we kind of forget about Chase Ashbrenner in a lot of ways. Like, very good recruit coming in, hasn't really done anything yet. Has the talent. Isaiah Givens was great this past indoor season in the mile. What can he do with another year on the program? Like, there's just so many different guys that you go through that have the potential. And I think at the very least, you're looking at a structure of you have a great low stick, and then you have a bunch of guys in that like top 100 range. I just don't think that they're gonna be able to. That Wetmore isn't going to be able to get this group of guys to at least be running in the 80, 100 range, and that's not super sexy, and that's not super like potential wise very high, but that's going to land you around the 10th spot. Like, if you do that. So like and I think we just have too much faith in this program to put them any lower.
Who's their second scorer?
I really like Hunter Appleton. I'll go with him.
Wow. Okay. And I don't know who it's going to be, but I would say probably Matheson or Overberg.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about saying a freshman, but I could see Overberg.
So am I. I'm also nervous, but my thing is like I don't think Colorado's going to field him if he's not ready. But also, why not? I mean, I've said that a lot.
They'll kind of need
A lot.
to.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, if they're deep enough, like if we think some of these guys, like I don't know. It depends. It depends because anyone could pop, and we don't know who it is, and that's what makes me frustrated. And now we're moving on because now I don't know what more I can say about this.
All right,
so
let's go to number 9 on the women's side, and that is the Stanford Cardinal. This is still a very young, developing team. Obviously, they got a lot of press during the track season with their top 800 middle distance duo, but they got a lot of young women who can also lead this team moving forward. Sofia Dudek, who I guess is transitioning to veteran status, is still there. You got Lucy Jenks, who we really like. And then I really like Riley Stewart, and you got some huge additions in Amy Bundage and Irene Riggs, who could come in. And I don't think it is hyperbolic to say that they could be, by the end of the season, their top 2 scorers by the end of the year. I think they have that much potential, and they could be like low All Americans.
I agree. Like, I mean, this team is scary, scary, scary good. The Will they be better than last year? Yes. The biggest question though was Dudek. Dudek finally put together a complete cross country season, like a nationally competitive cross country season last fall. Was solid in the winter, but she has moments of inconsistency. And then her end of her spring campaign was, I'll say it was bad. It wasn't good. Then she went to U23 Polish Championships, and something was clearly off. I'm not going to assume anything or speculate about it, but I don't. I think it's fair to say that she was not at top form and top fitness. That was June or July, even. That I forget exactly when, but that was this past summer. That wasn't just like, oh, that was back in March, right?
Yeah.
I question what her status is going to be coming into this fall. Like, I really do. And I just don't know. If she's at 100%, Stanford's way past nine. Like,
Yeah.
you're flirting with the top five at that point. Um, because
Yeah, because you have four potential All
you have four
Americans right
potential
there.
All Americans. You have Jinx, Dudek, Bunnage, and Riggs. The problem with that is Jinx didn't always show that. Dudek is a little up and down. Bunnage is a true freshman despite how talented she is. Riggs is a true freshman despite how talented she is. And while I love the depth on this team, I don't think they're going to have a bad race, which is why I think they're going to be better than last year, regardless of what happens. You just don't know. So it's the Jenna Hutchins problem all over again. If Dudek's at 100%, way higher ranking. If not, I think this is a fair spot given what happened last year.
I almost feel like they don't even. Obviously, she would be great to have, but if the freshmen pop like we think they can, like you have, and Jenks is a little bit more consistent, then you have an outstanding top three. And then, as you mentioned, they have good enough depth. Like behind them, they have enough names where I think they can fill in those 4 or 5 spots just fine. Like I think obviously she's going to be huge for them and raises their ceiling. But I think this is a team where you don't see this very often, where they have, I think, a high floor, but also a high ceiling. Like I think they have just enough women who were developed last year, and then they're adding on another good young crop of women who can take them up a level if they're ready. But they also have last year's group that is just going to be keeping them about where they should be, which is in the top 10.
And I'll admit fully, I wanted them higher than this. I had to negotiate for this, but I wanted them higher, and I still want them there, and I still want them higher. Like, I like Bunnage a lot. Like, I think she's probably as sure thing of a freshman as you're going to get.
Yep.
Riggs is
I mean, we compared her times like to Parker
like,
Volpe.
which is insane. Like, and I just like this team a lot. They're at their best, they're a podium team. Like, they're fourth place, maybe. And I think you need a little bit one woman to pop here or there, but I also think like we're undervaluing how good Riley Stewart could be.
Yep.
I want to apologize to Stanford now. I I should have fought harder. I don't know why the team was as resistant, and I think it's just because of the youth and the inexperience
Yep.
and the Dudek uncertainty, which is fair. Um, but
I think
yeah,
we are the wrong two people to be talking about this, because I think we're the two biggest Stanford Women
I
fans,
know,
at
I
least
know.
at TSR.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, let's move on to the men's side. Oregon, which is
An-
go ahead,
Another team we had to negotiate
another
with.
team we had to negotiate. Um, lose Aaron Bienenfeld, pretty much bring back everyone else. They
Yep.
swap Bienenfeld for Sturry, who is basically we think is going to be Bienenfeld light, and then it's just who knows? Elite, elite, elite depth. Just crazy good young guys. Abdi Nahir
Yep.
Hussein's probably a bit of a nice older guy. Who's the
Hmm.
second scorer on this team this fall? Let's do this exercise. Who's their top five?
So Hussein's in there, obviously Sturry. I think James Gormley has to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Reinhardt Harrison, but I don't think this is him yet. I think Connor Burns. And give me Quincy Norman.
I have the same top five, except I'm swapping Archie Noakes with Quincy Norman.
Okay. I think
Archie
that's
Noakes
fair.
is a 13, 52 Australian, the Aussie, but there's 10 guys, 12 who could realistically be in
Yeah.
that top five, maybe.
Yeah, and the reason we had to negotiate with this is I was a little lower on this team. I obviously
Say
they
it.
have a lot of the same flaws as a Colorado um, team does, but I think I think when we talked about this on the phone, I think my biggest question with Colorado is how many men are going to be in the top five for Oregon that went to Eugene last year, and I wonder how
You just
well
mean went
this
to
team.
Oregon last year.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah. Like like resided in Eugene. Like I don't know, and that kind of scares me, um, because you're almost relying on a completely overhauled team to get you inside the top 10 at nationals.
But they're so much fun.
Oh, but they got so many options. Like I mean, they could probably build out two rosters that have a lot of potential.
Ben, I don't know if you even read this, but what I said is,
Oh, I'm seeing that now.
did
Yeah.
I said the same
I
exact
didn't even
thing.
read
The
that.
depth, we're so good. We're so on par. I said they could realistically field two different varsity lineups and they could each qualify for the national meet. Like
Yeah, agreed.
that's yeah, and they're that much fun. I think it's very easy though for people like ourselves and just for fans of the sport where high school stars are, I would argue, maybe get more like attention than like someone who's fifth to 10th place at the cross country national meet sometimes. Like, I mean, just some of these guys get so much attention, and you look at the brand of Oregon, you combine that with Birnbaum
Yeah,
and Burns, and then you bring in, Echo Hawk and Wadake and Sergio Del Barro and Archie Noakes, and like you look at all these dudes, Will Helslem as well. You look at all these dudes, you're like, it's really easy to get excited, like to be like, oh, they're gonna be so good, but then you have to like bring it back. They're inexperienced. They haven't raced AK 10K distances on the grass against this competition. They might need a year or two of development, maybe
yeah.
three. So I think it's very easy for us to get super excited about the name recognition of these guys, but also understand like there's a lot of liability that comes with youth. So
I mean, we felt that same way about like someone like Reinhard Harrison last year, and he didn't run at all last year. Like and who knows? Maybe he breaks out this year. We don't know. It like you said, it does take time. Who? So I think we both have Burns above Beerbaum in terms of the ability to help on the grass this year. What do you think the ceiling is for Burns this year? This cross country season.
um, the conventional wisdom tells me that his ceiling's like right around 40. My heart, like my runaway imagination's like, what if he's like 26? You know? But I think conventional wisdom tells me that's not going to happen. I think he's probably cracking the top 50 on a good day. Maybe he's flirting with the 40, but I'd say probably like 46, 47.
Yep, I was gonna say 45.
Yeah,
I think I think All American is a little aggressive.
that's
Who
how.
knows?
Yeah,
Maybe surprise us. But I mean, obviously, as the times and the cross country finishes that you would want from a recruit, but it is very difficult. We've seen that time and time over again. I think one thing that I think was super underrated was Grant Fisher's freshman year. You
hmm
think about it, how like I feel like some people were underwhelmed with 17th or at I think it's 17th or 18th at nationals his freshman year. It was like, man, he should be like he's the next great American runner, and like he's not even finishing top 10 at cross country. That was an amazing result. That is once in generation kind of result as a freshman. Like we need to realize that we can't like expect hardly anyone to do that.
Well, and also like I just looked at this the other day. Tui was 24th in her first cross country national meet as a true freshman. Now, granted,
Yeah.
it was in the winter, so she had like a couple months of adjustment. But I mean, like if Caitlin Tui is 24th as a freshman and Grant Fisher 17th, it's not crazy to be like, yeah, sorry. Like if we think that he's not going to be in the top 40, like
Yeah.
sorry, you know. So that's that. Let's move on to the women's side, where I guess we're sticking with Oregon.
We're staying in Eugene on the women's side. Number 8 is the Oregon Ducks. And we have talked a lot about Oregon in the last
Mhm.
few weeks because they just continue to dip into the transfer portal and get great runner after great runner. They are adding to a team that was already very solid last year. Izzy Thornton bought clear low stick right there. But then you have women like Maddie Elmore and Claudia Kazmierska, middle distance runners who had great track seasons. Elmore, who showed flashes on the grass last year. Kazmierska, who was in the lineup, but it wasn't great. But I think we can bank on a lot of improvement after what she showed this track season. And then you bring in Victoria Patterson, who I think is at the very least, an All American candidate. And I think is going to be a top 50 runner for them. And just it gives them another uh, good low stick, someone that can stabilize that front end of the lineup, along with Thornton Bott. And then you got all these other women who great freshmen, great like women for the future, like Sam McDonald, and then someone like Delia Frias, who if she can come in and run, like could be a nice little piece by the end of the year.
So just to clarify for everyone, so again, in case you missed our past episodes, Mia Barnett has also transferred to Oregon. However, based on what we've learned, it's highly unlikely that she'll be racing this fall due to NCAA transfer rules. We had the
Mm-hmm.
same concern about Patterson, who's originally started at Duke, went to Columbia, is now at Oregon, but there is optimism, and it's not confirmed yet, but there's optimism that she'll be racing. And so, based on that information, we put Oregon at 8. And if that's the case, then yeah, they have, like you said, Ben, two key low stakes that you kind of rally around. They complement each other really well. Elmore, I think, is could be a problem, but I also
Yep.
think we're underrating Harper McLean a little bit. Like she was really solid, 11th at Pac-12s, 89th at Nationals. I think you kind of look at what she did on this past spring, 10:02 in the steeple. I'm like, man, if she's your fourth runner, you're having a really good lineup there. Like if
Yep.
if she's there, so I think you pair that top four, and then you just need enough. I mean, we're forgetting how good these recruits are. Like again, Delia Frias, I think, is probably going to be eligible. I don't think Sam McDonald will because she already,
No, probably not.
transferred and raced right. Yeah, but then you bring in Lily Cridge and Kate Peters and Allura Marcow and Katie Klude and Ella Thorsett. Cridge and Peters were studs in high school. If just one of them hits, I mean, Oregon's maybe even at 6 or 7 in these rankings. So, yeah, I would be very excited if I was Oregon. We've got a ton of other women on this roster. Kazmierska and Tatum Miller, the Portland State transfer, Anika Thompson, Melissa Berry. Like, there's options. They're deep. They're balanced. They're growing. They have firepower. Shalane Flanagan has proven to be awesome. So, yeah, I like this team the more I wrote about them.
This is a team that I think we could be talking about in September or even early October. Be like, maybe they're not living up to their potential. I think that we could see them start slow, but by the time November rolls around, they're 8 or better. Like I just think that with the amount of younger options, that this team could really grow and build a lot of momentum by the end of the year.
And I think that's totally fair. That's totally fair. So let's move on. We're gonna go to Virginia men. That's right. Were you an advocate for Virginia at 8?
I was. Let me take the mic here. I am super excited about this young and up and coming Virginia team. I compared to like what we talked about on the men's side, Oregon, Colorado, Tennessee, a lot of teams that have maybe one good option up front, but then just have a lot of options for the back end, but not a lot of proven or NCAA tested options in the back. And Virginia is about the exact opposite of this team. They bring back almost everyone. I think they're just losing Asfal from last year, and or
They don't. I do want to note. I looked. They no longer have Derek Johnson listed on the
oh,
roster. Yeah, so I did note that, which is not fun.
that's
But
not fun.
yeah,
Yeah, don't love that. So they lose Asphalt and Johnson, but they bring back a lot of really good names. I think you got Justin Wachtel. You got Nathan Mountain, who has not really run hardly at all on the grass, but was great during the track season, one of the best steeplechasers in the country. He, on paper, should be someone that could finish in the top 50 or 60. You got someone like Yassine Sato, you got Wes Porter, and then you got Gary Martin, who I think showed flashes and ran. This is a team that ran super aggressively last year, and I think it was to their detriment because I think they were a year too early in their development curve to be able to do that. That experience, I think, though, is really good for them moving forward this year. They're going to be able to go out aggressively and I think hang on this year with another year of experience, another year of mileage under their belt. And I just think, while this team might not have any All-Americans, and that's a hard needle to thread when you're number 8, they certainly could have 5 guys from that 50 to like 80 range. They're just going to be like what we talked about Portland maybe being over the last few years. I think they're going to be better. And in terms of pushing their depth a little bit further than maybe we had talked about those Portland teams. I just really like the experience these guys got last year. You're not really relying on a whole lot of new guys, although they have some new talent coming in. They can rely on a lot of guys who have great experience and I think are going to all collectively take a nice step forward.
That was beautiful.
I don't know why I like this Virginia team so much, but I'm a big fan.
I don't know why you like them either. Yeah, and we'll fully admit we didn't realize Johnson.
Yeah, that hurts.
That hurts. But at the same time, like, here's a fun fact: they didn't have him as a scorer until the regional meet last year. So it's not like it really matters. Like it didn't. He wasn't there. Or like so, and and they weren't even that great at the national meet anyway. So it's all moot at some point or another. I think Wachtel and Mountain can be low sticks if they develop properly. I think it's very realistic. And yeah, like they're just safe. They're a safe bet. I don't quite love them enough just because it's the justification of, well, how can you have no All-Americans
right and finish that high?
And I just don't know. So we'll see. The numbers are a little tough to justify, but yes, as a Virginia Tech alum, I do like the UVA men. I do like them. I don't know if I like them as much as you. I think maybe that's just my bias showing, but I do like them.
I mean, a lot of these guys came in with pretty good accolades, maybe not as good as some of the guys like that Oregon has, but they've been in the NCAA system for a year or two now, and you're not relying on someone coming in and just making that instantaneous impact. These are guys that have gotten the opportunity to run the 8K, 10K distance, and they have that talent that they've proven in years prior, and on the track, especially for a lot of these guys. I just think they're a lot more primed to break out than a lot of these other teams with a lot of younger, unproven guys.
And I would agree with that. There's 2, maybe 3 names who are going to break out. We just don't know who they are.
Exactly.
So,
yep.
Moving on to UNC Women. Bring back pretty much everyone. They lose Carly Hansen. She was not in their national meet lineup. They do lose Natalie Tyner, who is a sneaky good name for them last year. That's not a fun one to lose. And I think that's a much more tricky one than I think some people might realize. Yep. But Bryn Brown was really good. Kelsey Harrington was really good. Naglia looked like she was getting back to her freshman year form. She could be that third, right?
Mm-hmm.
Erin Parks had moments where she was 50th at Nuttycombe. Not as great in the postseason, but still, like, you have the core there. And then you bring in, Sierra Shiva from
O'Shea.
O'Shea. Thank you. I'm the worst at names. Fatima Alanis was really awesome as a stable back end runner. She was great. Oh my gosh, who's the other? Eva Klingbell was making great progress in the postseason as a freshman. She ran 16:02 for 5,000 meters. I think some people are like, well, how they finished 5th at the national meet. How could they be 7th? It's like, well, that was probably a slight overperformance for UNC. They lose a massively pivotal 3rd, 4th scorer there. And I don't think we know what the consistency of Parks is. And at this point in our rankings, when you're at 7, you probably need some of those answers to be a little more. I think you need the screws to be a little more tight to be ranked a little bit higher.
In this year, yes, you do. Like the at a normal year, I think you could make a pretty good argument for them to be higher. this year the top of the women's rankings, without giving them away yet, are incredibly good. Like these top 5 or 6 teams could all in most years have an argument for being national title favorites. Like they are very, very good. And so this is, I think, less about North Carolina than it is how we feel about a lot of these other teams who are ahead of them. And I think that's why it's like, yeah, they finished fifth. That was, I think, their best performance of the year. And maybe they were a little over their skis with that result. But also, like, they didn't get better. Like they're relying on an internal improvement where a lot of these other teams went out and got like a lot of talent in the
Mhm.
door, and they can
Did
bank on
you read the
internal.
article?
I did not. I went through.
That's
I went through. I like scanning it, but I have not read the full thing.
because that's basically what I said, and I was like, because I asked the question, it's like, well, how are they not better than TSR number 7? And I go, it's important to note that other teams around the NCAA made massive upgrades,
Yeah.
like, and that's exactly like what I just went through. So I'm glad that you recognize we're really on par today. By the
This
way,
is a
like we're
good day for
insane.
us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we're killing it. So I do like the team just because I think there's a lot of natural growth opportunities. But that's really been the main theme of this team is natural growth for the past 3 years. Percent chance they land on the podium this fall.
Ooh, like 5. I
Okay,
just,
I don't think that's rude.
I
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, they have a chance, but
yeah.
there's just you got 6 teams ahead of them that I would be kind of stunned if those 6 teams didn't make it.
I'd say like 8 to 10
Yeah.
percent.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
Let's wrap it up with our number 7 team on the men's side, and that is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Does this felt high for me?
Felt high.
I think this, and we'll go over this with our as we go through in the next few weeks, the top 6. They have a true low stick in Carter Solomon. They lose Isaiah Story. They lose some other back end scorers. But they have a lot of talent from years past. We really like the Vinny Mari addition. I think he's going to be awesome for them. Quite frankly, I think he's probably one of the most underrated men in the country. What he can do his in the middle distances and on the grass is quite frankly almost unparalleled in the country, and I think he's landing in a perfect program for that. Josh Methner kind of fell off the map last year, but is someone who, at his best, is almost an All-American lock, if not a top like 60 lock. And then they bring in a lot of other good transfers. What is the ceiling for this team though? Because I think that's kind of the issue that we had with a lot of these teams behind them. There's a lot of good teams in front of them, and there's a lot of question marks for a team that's ranked this high. What do you think they could ultimately end up?
Well, here's the thing. Just because I say their ceiling is like 1 or 2 spots higher does not mean that I think they have an equal like how do I put this? It's tough to be 1 or 2 spots higher when you're already
Right,
ranked this
exactly.
high, right? So like I don't think it's quantitative by just based on ranking because also you can like I think we've argued that the gap between the top 6 teams in our men's rankings is
Huge.
massive between the next 12 and however many teams, right? Like it's a massive like tier
Yeah.
drop off.
The
Um
7 through
no
13 that we've talked about today on the men's side, you could make a pretty decent argument for interchanging almost all of them. Like they are fairly close, and they're
yeah.
like, I think Notre Dame's closer to Villanova, who was what, 12 or 13, than they are to our number 16.
And I would agree with that. The thing with Notre Dame though is that I can point to them and be like, I'm gonna get at least 2 low sticks and maybe 4 lead
Yeah.
scorers. Like that's the thing. And at that point, you're like, okay, well, who are they? They're like, well, you have Carter Solomon. If Josh Methner is actually going to be racing the
Right.
postseason, he's one of them. Vinny Mari and Tyler Berg, who was top 80 at the national meet. And you go like, well, like that's really good. That's really good. And you take a look at all of these other guys who are returning. Ethan Coleman, who's ran 28:46, I want to say for 10K. He was a redshirt freshman last year. Like he's coming back. There's just so many other guys. Like they've got the Cornell graduate transfer, who I'm going to butcher the name here. It's Prakash from Cornell. He's run 13:51 and 7:55 for 3,000 meters. Jake, like if Jake Renfrey, which again it's kind of like the Ewart
Yeah,
situation, if he's back his freshman year form, awesome. If not, then he was 105th at nationals.
he's going to be solid.
Like so, if,
Yeah,
if that's Quinn Gallagher was 78th at Nuttycombe. They've got all those like the CJ Singletons and Sam Rich and Dalian Ackley and Brody Hartley and Kevin Sanchez. Like I you look at what this team has on paper and strictly on paper, and I don't know how they're not a top 10 team.
yeah. I think they're definitely top 10, especially when you compare them to the other teams. Like I talked about with Virginia, like they have guys who have been in the NCAA system, they have the experience, and they have good times in the track where on paper they look solid. Like and they feel a lot less volatile than a lot of these other teams behind them. Like their floor, I think, is much higher. I think this is another team. I can't remember who we talked about on the women's side, but their floor ceiling gap, I feel like, is as narrow as anyone in the country. Like yeah,
Notre Dame.
I just think they're going to be like at their best, they're 6. At their worst, they're like what, 11, like 12,
Mm.
maybe.
I didn't. Yeah, I get. Yeah, I mean, well, I think you could have said the same thing about last year's
Yeah,
team, and then they were
that's
15th at the
fair.
national meet. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I guess. I guess I don't know. I think I maybe see a little bit more downside just because we are projecting a little bit for a team that's ranked this high. But I don't think they're going to be like I don't think they're going to be any worse than they were
Well,
last year.
yeah, we're
When they finished
projecting
last
them
year.
to be to get them to 7th, but we're really not having to project anything to get them to finish 11th. I guess is my point. Like if they just are who they are on
Well,
paper,
no,
they're going to be like, and that's why I'm like, I don't think they have a ton of downside to them.
and that's fair because but the problem with this team is also like their regular season was vastly different
Yeah,
from their postseason. They were awesome in the regular season, like earned every bit of a top 10 ranking and
yeah,
then some. They were bad in the
yeah,
postseason, bad. And so I don't know how to gauge that. How do you gauge losing Sturry, Barry, Carmody, and someone else who I'm just not
yeah.
thinking of other Cheeseman? Um, but then they had 3 grad transfers and the rookies and the guys coming back. And you can begin to see why this is a delicate game of make your
Yep.
lineup. So
Absolutely. Yeah. They'll be a fascinating team to watch. And I think they're going to be a really interesting team to keep an eye on who's in that like 5, 6, 7 spot. Like I think that could churn,
yeah,
that roster could churn a few times to see who ultimately wins those positions.
I agree. I agree. So let's wrap it there. Good pod. We were in sync today.
We were.
We
This is
were
a good run.
the yeah. No, I'm can't wait to argue with you about the top 6 teams in our rankings. But thank you for everyone who's been hanging around and enjoying these. Make sure to leave a rating and review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Go get yourself a subscription on thestrideport.com, annual plans and monthly plans. You get a 14-day free trial for all first-time users. Shout out to Wyatt Barnsley for editing our nightmare of pods. I mean, the audio, God bless you, dude. We're going to maybe move to Riverside soon. I'm not sure. But other than that, Ben, that's all I have on my end.
All right. Well, until next week, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.